Good evening and welcome to this meeting of the Planning Committee. I am Councillor Pauline Hazel and I will be chairing the meeting. To begin the meeting, there are a few matters of housekeeping. A risk assessment, including COVID-19 risks, has been undertaken for this meeting. Hand sanitizer, wipes and masks are available. Masks must be worn whilst seated and when moving round the meeting room, unless you have a medical exemption. These can be removed when speaking and addressing the committee. There are no practice alarms planned for this evening, so if an alarm sounds, please evacuate the town hall by going down the main staircase or the back staircase to the High Street and then to the car park behind the town hall in St Ronald Street. This meeting is being recorded for live broadcast over the internet on the Council's YouTube channel and will be available afterwards. Please would speakers use microphones at all times and speak directly into the microphone, and would participants, both joining us online and in the moot hall, please mute the microphones when not speaking. Members of the committee will introduce themselves, starting from my right, then the rest of the committee sitting opposite.
I'm Councillor Robert Davidson from Mersey and Pipefleet Ward.
I'm Councillor Roger Mannion from Tiptree Ward.
Good evening, Councillor Patricia Moore, Mersey and Pipefleet Ward.
Councillor Jarrod Oxford, Highwoods Ward, substituting for Councillor Beverley Oxford, who has leadership tonight.
Councillor Martin Warnes, Beerchurch Ward.
Councillor Mike Lilly, Old Heath, The Hive and Row Hedge Ward.
Councillor Sam McCarthy, representing Shrub End Ward and substituting for Councillor Lynn Barton.
I'm Councillor Helen Chua for St Anne's and St John's Ward.
Thank you, committee. In attendance here are planning officers Chris Harden, Majid Harouni, Nadine Calder and Simon Cairns. Democratic Services officers Richard Clifford and Robert Carmichael are here for procedural matters. Also in attendance tonight via Zoom are Martin Mason of Essex County Council's Highways Department and Mark Norman from National Highways. Members of the committee may use electronic devices to access their meeting papers, and visitors are welcome to use mobile phones and other devices, including cameras, but please use them discreetly, set them to silent, and do not use voice or camera flash functions. A slight change to the procedure this evening. We will be having a 15-minute break between item 7.1 and 7.2. There are toilets on every floor in the building. We have an induction loop in this room. This is a quasi-judicial committee which makes decisions based on material planning considerations following the laws of the land and policies of the council. If the committee is minded to refuse an application, members will use such considerations and evidence that will stand up in a court of law. The material planning considerations are listed in the committee's agenda. You have heard already our substitutions. Councillor McCarthy for Councillor Barton, Councillor G. Oxford for Councillor B. Oxford, and Councillor Moore for Councillor McLean. There are no urgent items this evening. Committee, do we have any declarations of interest, please? Councillor Warnes.
Thank you, Chair. Can I declare a non-pecuniary interest in item 8 as I'm a director of CCHL?
Thank you. Any more? No? If anyone has a petition they wish to present to me on any of the items on the agenda this evening, please do so now. No. I will now go through the have your say sheet. The first item on the agenda this evening, 7.1, is for outline planning permission with all matters reserved, save for access for the demolition of all existing buildings and structures and the creation of a residential development with associated open space and infrastructure. It's recommended for approval subject to section 106 legal agreement and conditions. Our presenting officer this evening is Nadine Calder. Public speaking against is Mr. Stephen Mosley. For is Ms. Alice Routledge via Zoom. Councillors wishing to speak on this item, Councillor Whitehead in person, Councillor Lee Scordis via Zoom, and Councillor Adam Fox in person. Item 7.2 is land west of 194 and east of 202 Old London Road, Marks Tay. Development of the site for commercial business and service with parking provision for lost residents, on-street parking and landscaping, including diversion of a public right-of-way and off-site highway, improvement to Old London Road and its junction with the A120. It's recommended for approval subject to conditions and section 106 legal agreement. Our presenting officer this evening is Simon Cairns. Public speaking against is Gerald Wells. For Mr. James Firth. Councillors, Councillor Lewis Barber via Zoom, Councillor Kevin Bentley to be read by Robert Carmichael, and Councillor Andrew Ellis also to be read by Robert Carmichael. Item 8 is a director's report amendment to the legal agreement condition for planning application 190665, land between via Herbis, Romania and Mill Road, land south of Axial Way, Colchester. It's recommended that we approve these amendments to the legal agreement and conditions. Our presenting officer this evening is Simon Cairns. There are no public for, against, and no councillors speaking. Thank you very much. So we can now begin with our first application. So please, Ms. Calder, will you start us off with 7.1, please?
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. This is an application for outline planning permission for up to 130 dwellings, with all matters reserved except for access. The site is the former Man Energy Solutions employment site, which is outlined in red. As you can see here, the red line goes around this area here, leaving a little employment use here, with the surrounding area being mostly residential in use. And that the application has all matters except access reserved, so it's a very high level application. The only details we have received is for the access into the site, the details of which you can see here. Going back to the location plan, the access is proposed in this corner here. And then the application is supported by a parameter plan, which highlights, again, just in principle, the scale of the development. So within this area that is hatched in orange, it will need to provide the residential development plus 10% of public open space. That has not been fixed because the layout is not shown, so it will be premature to fix the public open space. What you can see is the different areas which are hatched, which show up to 2.5 stories in height, up to 3 and up to 4 stories in height. And to put the site in context, this is where the blue sign is here. This is an existing access which is not used as much as the main access into the site, but this is where the access for the residential development is proposed. And this view is towards the southern corner of the site from Port Lane, with these existing buildings all proposed to be demolished. This is the view towards the access again from the other side. These buildings are the former employment site, which is now vacant, and there's residential dwellings to the south of the site. This is a view into the site from the public footpath along the southern boundary of the site, and you can see the residential dwellings here along the eastern boundary of the site in Peach Road. This is a view down the public footpath along the southern boundary of the site, for which the contributions that are sought as part of this application, it will go towards enhancing this footpath to make it a shared footpath and cycleway, to make it safer and more convenient for users. This is another view into the site from Port Lane. Again, these buildings are the existing employment buildings, but they're proposed to be demolished in favour of the proposed development. This is the existing access into the site, which to some extent would need to be retained, because this building here is the building that is still in employment use and is outside of this application. So this access would still serve for the time being this employment use here. That's a different view of the access. This is a view into the site from the most northwestern corner of the site. And just for information, this building here that I'm now circling is the house on the hill, which you may hear about later. And this is a view towards the existing employment building that is to be remained. And the last two photos show, this is the northwestern corner of the site with mostly residential buildings on the other side of Port Lane. And again, here, just showing the context, the site is on this side here in the left of the picture, and these are residential dwellings on this site. So what we're asking you to look at today is simply the principle of development. I go back to the location plan, because it is in outline form, we've got no details of design or layout or anything like that. So we are just asking you to consider the principle of the use, which is for residential purposes, and the site is allocated for residential development in the emerging local plan, to which significant weight can be given, which is why the application is recommended for approval. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Calder. May I ask Stephen Mosley to address the committee, please? Mr. Mosley, you have 3 minutes, and the bell will go after 2.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I would like to start by noting that LTN 1/20, the government's latest cycling standards, states that developments that do not adequately make provision for cycling in their transport proposals should not be approved. Colchester Cycling Campaign is concerned that this development does not provide the high quality cycle infrastructure required to enable most people to cycle, as aspired to in, for example, the recently published Colchester Future Transport Strategy. We would like to see coherent, direct, safe, comfortable and attractive cycle access to existing neighbouring developments and the wider area. The public rights of way 140, 141, 142, 143 and 144 upgraded to a segregated cycle route that is segregated between pedestrians and cyclists, like the Coton route in Cambridge to link to the Hythe. Improvements to cycle routes to local schools like Kendal Primary and TLA. And finally, a borough-wide Section 106 contribution to cycle infrastructure maintenance. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mosley. May I ask Alice Routledge to address the committee, please? Oh, she's coming via Zoom, sorry.
Hello, just checking you can hear me before I start.
Yes, we can.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair, and good evening to members. I am Alice Routledge, Man Energy's Planning Advisor. Man Energy has worked closely with your officers, and we would firstly like to thank them for their hard work and recommendation for approval. Due to the deteriorating economic outlook accelerated by the COVID-19 pandemic, Man Energy received no orders for new engines in 2020 and therefore took the difficult decision to close its Colchester premises, with operations ceasing in August 2021. The site is currently allocated for employment use, but has a draft housing allocation in your emerging local plan. The emerging local plan is going through examination, and the inspector has made no objections to the Port Lane element of policy EM3, apologies. Therefore, policy EM3 should be afforded very significant positive weight in the determination of this application. The Council's policy team are supportive of this approach and raise no objections. Man Energy has fully considered all comments made by your officers, consultee organisations and the local community. Throughout the pre-application determination period, the scheme proposals have been amended where possible to address the feedback received. The scheme proposals before you this evening are acceptable because, firstly, in accordance with emerging policy EM3, the proposals will provide up to 130 new market and affordable homes and will be accessed from Port Lane. Future reserve matters applications will consider the ground conditions and drainage strategy in more detail, but the applicant has demonstrated that there are no flood risk or contamination issues that would prevent the redevelopment of the site for housing. Secondly, the proposals will include 30% affordable housing in line with emerging policy, and the indicative housing mix demonstrates that the site could accommodate a range of 1, 2, 3 and 4 bedroom homes and apartments. The site will also make effective use of a vacant brownfield site in a sustainable location and a regeneration area for housing, and will relieve pressure on greenfield land in the borough. The site will include public open space, achieve more than 400% biodiversity net gain, and will also include a 10% increase on tree canopy cover in line with emerging policies. Man Energy's professional team have engaged with the Colchester Civic Society regarding the building in the northeast corner and have explored a range of options. The proposals will include a smart energy amenity area to commemorate the historic significance of the Paxman factory and provide a recreational facility for the community. The applicant has also agreed to make a financial contribution towards a memorial plaque for Paxmans. Financial contributions will also be made towards community, museums, parks and recreation, archaeology, ecology, the NHS, education and sustainable transport, including cycling, as well as providing land to improve the cycle and footpath network immediately surrounding the site. In summary, the proposed development accords with the Council's adopted and emerging development plan and national planning policy. No objections have been raised by the Council's technical officers or Anglian Water, the Environment Agency, Essex County Fire and Rescue, Essex Police, Essex Highways, the Health and Safety Executive, the lead local flood authority or Natural England. It is therefore respectfully requested that members grant outline planning permission in line with your officer's recommendation for approval. Thank you for your time this evening.
Thank you, Ms. Routledge. We now have councillors to address the committee. Councillor Whitehead, would you like to address us? Thank you. And you will know you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. First, I want to say, it is a shame to see Paxman's go, and I think it's important to recognise that an important employer and an important part of the history of our borough and particularly of the ward that I represent. Nevertheless, it is good to see, I think, a brownfield site being developed. That's what we say we always want, so that's good to see, and the gain of public open space and some relatively affordable housing, I think is to be welcomed. There are a number of issues that I hope will be considered by the committee and as this application develops. First of all, I have some concerns about the proposal to have the higher 4-storey housing towards the front of the site. It seems like a strange location for that. It doesn't fit with the other surrounding buildings in the area, which are single-storey residential. So I think that would be better to have a lower height towards the front of the site, or perhaps for that to be relocated in a different part of the site. I have some concerns around issues related to active travel. I share the I think there's a real opportunity when it comes to new developments to build in the good quality infrastructure around cycling and walking from the start. And I do share Colchester Cycling Campaign's concerns about the quality of the cycling infrastructure on the site. In particular, we know that shared use should be a last resort, but it seems to have been taken as proposed as a first option here. And it would be better if the main cycle routes through the site were segregated, and also if the public right of way at the south of the site would be widened to 3.5 metres as requested by the Highways Authority. I think there's a real risk of car dependency with this particular development, because we lack an adequate bus route that actually stops by the development. So I think that's important to make sure we get that right around those sorts of issues. I would also query about the width of the roads on the site and whether they're going to be sufficient to accommodate parked cars within the site. That's a particular problem of cars mounting on the pavement in surrounding roads. The neighbouring existing development has a large problem with that, also other roads nearby, and obviously that creates accessibility issues. So I hope that will be considered and addressed. And I would like to see 24 miles per hour limits throughout the estate to favour, for safety's sake, and to encourage and not discourage more active travel. I also have a query about in relation to Section 106 in schools, and I just query whether an adequate Section 106 contribution has been sought for the potential pressure on local schools. The most natural primary school for children in the proposed estate to go to would be Kendal Primary School, which is just a short walk down the road, and that's a one-form entry school with very limited places. And I wonder whether the schools beyond that have space as well. I understand there's some suggestion that children might go to St James's School, but or that there might be space to take that pressure there, but that's very far away. It's unrealistic, really, for walking, I think, with young children from that distance. And the route to do that would be down Brook Street, which is one of the air pollution hotspots in our borough. It means likely that you're going to have children, parents travelling by car if they were to go to that school from this site. And they would also be travelling down Barrack Street and Brook Street, two of the most congested roads in the local area, and I would say probably the borough as well. So I hope that those issues will be considered and taken into account as the application is considered and developed. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Whitehead. It's very important points there. Councillor Lees-Gordis, are you with us via Zoom?
I'm always here, Madam Chair.
I can see you, and you will know too that you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, and thank you for allowing me to do this via Zoom. It's very helpful with work commitments. So yeah, much of it has been raised by Councillor Whitehead and Mr. Mosley about some of the concerns we have. Certainly support building on brownfield sites, and although the loss of Paxman, I mean, it's personal for me as well, as my grandfather used to work there, first job he got in Colchester. We know that we are where we are with the site, so no one else has taken it on, so I'd like to be housing. So cycling, as has been raised, is a real issue, and I'm worried that we do end up with, rather than segregated cycling, just the line down the road, which isn't really sufficient. And at the moment, most of the cycling routes only go in the direction of Hive Hill, rather than actually looking at the direction of Recreation Road and Old Heath Road, where obviously people do travel as well. So there would be an opportunity to expand that, and I'd like that to be looked at in 106 money. There are concerns about where the access road is going to be, the positioning of that. I mean, at the moment it is set quite a way back, but a lot of traffic is going to go that route, those who live down Morant and Harsnett, and we may be getting a one-way system as well, which may mean more traffic goes down that road as it is, so that is an issue. And then we come to the issue of the junction of Port Lane and Hive Hill, where there have been accidents recently. I see that vision is part of the highways terms of agreeing to it, improving the vision on that junction, but I do fear that with the increase of traffic, we may be looking at traffic lights because it could be that significant. It's already quite dangerous with some of the parking there being part of Newtown. Parking obviously been raised as well. Is it going to lead to people who live on Harsnett, Morant and Port Lane parking on this estate and causing problems? There's already some issues with that on the current Paxman Park site next door to where this site will be. School places, as my fellow colleague Lorcan rightly raised, is a big issue as well. We're giving a lot of money to the local church, which is fine. They do a lot of good work, but it's a lot of money. Would this money be better placed going to the schools and allowing some of the schools to maybe expand? Because Newtown is an area with a high proportion of young families. And a lot of social housing who tend to have young children. So as Councillor Whitehead has rightly pointed, they either end up being applying to Unity School in Greenstead, which is a very long walk, or St James's, which again is a very long walk and may lead people to using their car. Also, no 106 money going to the flooding issues at the Hive, again, with another Hive application, which is really disappointing. It's the biggest issue, flooded again today with high tide. It's an area that needs significant money. Instead, we've got 100,000 going to Leisure World, which a lot of residents, hate to say it, don't always use. Then also, it'd be interesting to know how the car club is going to work, how that works practically. Are we just saying, here's an electric car, we've given you this money, and a estate manager has the key? It seems a bit bizarre about how we organise that if there's not a resident in charge of that, and what happens if that resident moves and so forth. It's a very good progressive idea. Definitely not against the idea. I'm just wondering how it works in practicality, because again, it's quite a bit of substantial 106 money that could go to schools, to the rec, to sort of resolving the flooding issues. I think they're my main issues with some of the application. As I say, not against building on the brownfield site. I just feel that some of the 106 can go to better uses and concerns over some of the junctions and traffic with how substantial the growth has been in recent years. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Scordis. I understand Councillor Adam Fox is not with us this evening. So before I open up to the committee, Ms Calder, do you have any comments to make on what you've heard from so far?
I might make a few points, yes. They might be raised again, or maybe it will address some of the comments you might want to make. So in order, there were 4-storey heights. What I would like to point out is that the parameter plan is indicative. So at the moment they say it may be 4 stories to the front of the site, 2 stories within the site. That will all be down to the final design of the scheme. So if and when we get the reserve matters application with details, elevations and design, if the 4 stories doesn't work in the context of the site and surrounding area, then it may be that there can't be any 4-story dwellings in that area. So at this moment in time, it's indicative. It's up to 4-story. It doesn't mean it has to be 4-story. Could be 1, could be 2, could be 3, could be 4. So that's just indicative. It's not set in stone. Cycling is, okay, it's a big one. So I've discussed this with our Transport and Sustainability Joint Lead Officer in the Council. They have suggested the contribution that is sought and the works that are proposed with regards to the widening of the footpath, they suggest a shared cycle and footway. And the reason for this is this particular area, is not urban enough to justify segregated paths. That would require more land. It would require physical separation of the two paths. And this is more to be found in urban areas than where we are now. She doesn't think it's justified. And that comes from the Sustainability Joint Lead Officer. So we are taking their advice, who are the experts in that field. What we do say is the footpath along the western boundary of the side will be widened and provide a cycleway, and the footpath around the southern boundary. So there is quite a bit of improvement to these areas, which link to Hythe Quay. And the more attractive it is, the more it's going to be used. So we do think there is going to be an improvement to the cycle provision in the area. Parking will be determined at reserve matter stage, and we would make sure that parking is in accordance with the parking standards. There is a condition suggested that says parking has to be in accordance with the parking standards, so they have to comply with them. The section 106 asked for quite a substantial amount of money towards early years, childcare and primary school. We're looking at £673,000 for primary school and £202,000 for early years and childcare. It will be down to Essex County Council as the Education Authority to decide where that money goes, whether they want to potentially increase the intake of one of the local schools, but that is a substantial amount of money which will help one way or another. The increase in traffic, I understand that there will be an increase in compared to the existing situation. What we must not forget is that this site is it was an active employment site. So there were a lot of cars coming and going at peak times. That is the lawful fallback use of the site. We can't look at it at the moment because it's vacant. So it's not going to be an increase from the existing situation. It's going to need to be compared to the lawful fallback of the employment site. So, and it was considered that the access is acceptable and 130 houses are acceptable. There are a couple of questions which I think I might have to defer to some of my colleagues. One of them is the 20-mile-per-hour zone. From what I understand is, I don't think we can impose that. I think there has to be quite a bit of evidence and justification. I know that our colleague Martin Mason is here, so at some point, if you wanted to have more confirmation about that, he may be able to help you. And the other one is the car club. How does it work? We have introduced it on other sites. How exactly it works, I must admit, I don't know whether you know, Simon, but it is okay. So it is something that, again, our transport and sustainability officers deal with on a regular basis. So I would assume they've got a model that works. And if councillors want more information about that, I'm happy to provide it outside of this meeting, but it is something that works, which is why we've suggested it.
Thank you very much, Ms. Calder. We have Councillor Mike Lilly as our first contributor.
Thank you, Chair. I think that a lot of the points were raised by the councillors that turned up tonight. Just a couple of issues that I'd like to see put in place. If Nadine puts up the southern footpath, where they're going to widen it, picture of that so everyone knows what I'm talking about. So we have a lot of antisocial behaviour and drug dealing exactly on this junction just here by that light. They usually leave the bags of drugs behind the post box. It's well known to police and everything. They do come down and patrol it, but it doesn't stop it. So widening the road, the footpath on the left would be really good. And if we can have some 106 money diverted probably, or maybe to put in a CCTV camera up. We've got a good system installed now at CVC where they use Wi-Fi, the cameras and that, so they could link them up. And a bit more lighting further down the road, which will help people. So I'm really happy that that's going to happen. As for the the cycling paths. I'm not a great fan of shared cycling paths. You just zigzag your way around people with children. It's horrendous. The worst people or the worst items you get is when somebody's there walking their dog, the lead stretches miles, and all of a sudden you've got a tripwire that goes on. I won't stop it won't stop if you had a designated one, but I would like to see a designated cycle path and footpath put in place here, be wide enough to do that, and you get all the way down to the Hive to connect up to the Wivenhoe path or the Rohedge Trail when it's open, hopefully soon. So there is a lot more potential here than what could be done on this outline, and I think that is probably about all I have to say. As everyone else has covered it. The parking is a massive issue already. They park just down the road here on the verges, so we want to know really what's going to stop that parking there. We have problems with the other site that was developed, the Paxton site around Len's Close estate. There's people parking from Newtown down there. Of course, residents in that area think it's their parking spaces, and of course leads to more problems. The roads there are very narrow. We don't want to see them repeated on this plan because it hasn't worked on the other plan. So it'd be nice to know if the roads are going to be wide enough to allow two cars to be parked on either side and an emergency vehicle to get through the middle. So perhaps the highways could answer that as they're there here tonight. Apart from that, I agree with everything my colleagues said, but I'm disappointed about the cycleways, and I don't like I know it's an outline, but I agree in principle to the rest of the state, no problems, but we could get this much better. So I'm not supporting it as it is now, but it could get better in the real application. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lilly. Councillor Chua.
Thank you, Chair. What I'm going to say is probably will come back as reserved matters, but I just want us to be able to take into consideration about the affordable housing units. I hope it's going to be the design the same as all the houses that are going to be built there. And I wouldn't want these affordable housing units to be in a corner on their own. You know, to say that, oh, we've given you a piece of land to build these houses, and that's where it's going to be, take it or lump it. So I want to make sure that when we come to consider to discuss about more reserved matters, that the affordable housing is discussed as to where it would be and the style of the housing. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Chua. Another is, oh, sorry. Councillor Warnes.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just some observations. I'm taking it as read that the 600,000 contribution for education is what ECC have asked for, and therefore I would defer to the Education Authority, knowing how much of a contribution they would need, because they would best be able to judge the likely usage of the local schools. I would support the idea of placing CCTV down the existing footway that Councillor Lilly has actually talked about. That has been problematic for some years. So I would welcome that, and I would welcome some thought going into making sure that the lighting is actually adequate, so as to along with the CCTV discourage some of the activities that are known to actually take place along that footway. I too am not at all happy with the idea of a shared cycleway footpath. You've only got to look around places like Butt Road as an example to just see they don't work. Mike is absolutely right. You are weaving in and out of people, and I hadn't thought about the idea of a dog lead, but yeah, that does present a potential trip hazard, and that's not good. So I would like to have a bit more detail about what the justification is for a shared cycleway in the spirit of actual accountability, because if an officer's going to say that's not justified, then surely they have to say why and how, so we can better understand that rather than just make the statement. But in broad terms, I am happy to support this application.
Thank you, Councillor Warnes. Councillor Moore.
Thank you, Chair. Series of questions. The amount of EV chargers that will be supplied, presumably that is that comes under reserved matters, but I hope there will be an adequate number, because there is at the moment a great shortage everywhere of EV chargers. I'd also like to know the status of the Whimple Road Methodist Church. We don't know. I don't often come across a planning application where a load of money is being given to a church. So the status of that, whether it's publicly owned or privately owned. RAMs are mentioned, but there is no, it says it's considered, but it doesn't actually say that the RAMs payment is to be made. And nobody has mentioned the retaining of the house on the hill so far, which has certain organisations are hoping that that will be retained. I wonder if I could have some answers on those. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Moore. The house on the hill was something I was going to bring up too. I have to say I agree with basically everything that has been said by councillors. This is a very tight site, and I do understand the concerns for cycling. I'm also not a fan of shared cycleways. Most bikes these days don't even have a bell to warn you that someone is hurtling towards you from behind. So it would be good to have more information on that. So Ms. Calder, do you have any comments on what you've heard from the councillors to add to what you've already said?
Yes, starting with the cycling, I think what you need to bear in mind is the photo that you've seen with the public footpath, that's the existing situation. That's the starting point. Any works to that, to make it wider, to provide more space for dog walkers, cyclists, pedestrians, people with a pushchair, mobility impaired, wheelchairs, anything is an improvement over the existing situation. So yes, you may want more in terms of the segregated lanes, but even a wider path is an improvement on what you have now. So you might have people now walking their dog on a long lead at the moment. A wider path will give you that much more space. So any works done to that footpath will be an improvement. And by improving that, coming to the second point, that will make more people use it. So there will be more natural surveillance of it, and hopefully more policing, so that maybe some of the activities that go on at the moment will not go away, but at least be decreased. CCTV is something that we could provide as part of the contribution that is sought by Transport and Sustainability, because their request is split into works being done to the footpath and a sum being provided. And from that sum that will be provided, we can actually make more improvements, and we could, if that's something that that members would like, look into CCTV cameras there. So that can certainly be accommodated within the request that we've made. The justification, so I spoke to my colleague, and the justification was simply a segregated footpath is more likely to be needed in an urban area. We are still within close proximity to Colchester town centre, but we are not within the town. We're outside of the town. So there is, in this particular location, it is not considered there's enough justification to ask for that separation, especially because, as I just said, the improvement will already be felt because it is wider and better than what there is at the moment. And Councillor Lilly was talking about the Rowhedge Trail. I believe the Wivenhoe Trail is a shared footpath and cycleway as well. And pardon? Right, okay, bad example. Okay, affordable housing, we will look at that at reserve matter stage, but of course we are trying on all sides to include that within the housing mix rather than pushing it to one side. So that will definitely be considered at that point. RAMS payment has not been made yet, but that will be included in the section 106. So they will have to make that payment. And EV charges, I am actually of the opinion that that is a requirement under building control. So I think going forward, there will be much more renewable energy, including EV charges and things like air source heat pumps and stuff like that. That will come under separate legislation, but we still encourage everyone to do it as part of the planning application. And I believe that's it. Oh, house on the hill. So the house on the hill, there's a number of factors that need to be considered. The site is allocated for housing, purely housing. If that was going to be retained as a community facility or anything else, a retail shop, that will be a different use to what the site is allocated. And technically speaking, that would be contrary to policy. The house on the hill is, what it really is a reminder of the former use of the site. And what we've considered all the information, all of the comments received, but we have considered that in the balance of everything, of all of these comments, the loss of the building is outweighed by the provision of new homes, which we need. And also there is quite a lot proposed in favour or instead of the house on the hill. So there's going to be a smart energy area, which is going to be powering things like, for example, a mobile phone. You can charge your mobile phone, and that's a nod to the use that was going on that site. There's going to be a contribution made to the museum to commemorate the use of the site through a plaque. So overall, we are of the opinion that there's mitigation in terms of commemorating the site, and this coupled with the with up to 130 houses, which is a big benefit, outweighs the harm that will be caused by the loss of that building.
Thank you. I understand there will be provision for a plaque or some such to be erected to commemorate the Paxman site, which is obviously very historical to this town.
So that's the smart, we call it a smart energy area. It's almost like an outdoor gym that is proposed at the moment. Again, outline only, no details. But what at the moment is proposed is it looks like an outdoor gym area where you can exercise, which also works with the health agenda at the moment. And that will generate power that you can then use to, for example, charge your phone. And that is a nod to what's been going on. And that is in addition to open space which needs to be provided on the site.
Councillor Oxford, please.
Thank you, Chair. Going back to these shared footpaths, I've got quite a lot in my ward, and I obviously use them a lot. The police advise me, being an electric wheelchair, I need to be in the cycle portion of rather than the pedestrian. So I do. But the amount of times I've been nearly wiped out by spin scooters and black scooters and God knows what else, whatever. According to the police, they are supposed to be on the road or only on a cycle portion. They're not allowed on footpaths, but they weave around like they own everywhere. And there have been in the press quite a significant amount of injuries caused by accidents involving these. In national press I'm referring to. I saw Simon face cringe up there, but there's been quite a few in the national press. And they are a law unto themselves. So if it was segregated, it might be safer for the other individuals using the cycle portion of the path. Now, I don't say it's going to rule out accidents, because a lot of the people I've seen using the scooters, I don't think could ride anything safely. But that's just a personal view from experience of what I've seen and witnessed. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Oxford. Councillor Davidson.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Yes, I've got a few queries really, please, for Nadine. And I did notice the Civic Society were quite keen to keep the house on the hill, but even they admit that actually it's not a usable building and an awful lot of it is actually breeze block construction, even though it's been producing electricity since 1880. So I have sympathy with the feasibility of whether it's practical to keep it or not. Having said that, I'm concerned that, as Councillor Moore is, that you're giving over £200,000 to the local Methodist church, and I want to be reassured that that's going to be open for all the community, not just those churchgoers. And the other question is really what other community facilities are there locally that we could perhaps contribute money towards? Because obviously with 130 houses and a lot of families as well, there will be a demand for that, hopefully. So that's one point. Somebody mentioned earlier about the car club and their concern about responsibility, and obviously we all think that's a great idea for sharing cars. It's probably not quite, well, I don't believe there's any in Colchester yet. But I just wondered who's going to take the responsibility for that. And I noticed in your report that there's only one charger and one parking space for that car. And I just think with 130 families, especially if some of them are 4-storey houses as well, there will be a demand for probably more than one car. And that brings me on to the electric charging points. I wasn't quite clear whether we have to insist on those at this stage or whether we do it at full planning later. If you could mention that, please. The other thing that I'd like to pick up from Councillor Lilly really was CCTV. I think CCTV along the footpath and on Port Lane would be quite helpful, just to make sure that there's no antisocial behaviour. And I know Councillor Lilly was also suggesting that perhaps the whole estate could be a 20-mile-an-hour zone. That would encourage responsible driving, and more importantly, it would keep it safer for younger children. So I think I would certainly support that. And I think that's all the points I've got so far. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Davidson. Councillor Lilly again. Thank you.
Yeah, just a couple of points of clarity. With the car club, going back to my days of portfolio holder in charge of parking, we've had some car club, a few now in Colchester for about 3 years. They've been operating here. They've got spaces all around the town. They've been quite popular, and it's a way forward that. And the way it works, you register with the car club, and when you want to use it, the keys are in a locked, I'm not sure where it is on this one, but they're usually in a locked place nearby where they give you the code, you take the keys, you use the car, you go to the railway station if you want to drive to there or anywhere else, and then you leave it there, lock it up, and at night you can then just take a car and go back and replace the one that you had there. So they are really quite good. It's sort of the future without people buying cars and using them. And just a word about the church. It's actually in Newtown Church around there, but it's very popular. It runs a lot of creches, daytime activities, and an awful lot of community events. So but it needs a lot of support because it's an old church building, a Methodist church. But they do a lot for the community around the area, and it's the only church that's still open for both wards, Old Heath and in Newtown, around the Hive area. So it's quite a popular area, and that's probably why they got all the money for to help keep running it.
Thank you, Councillor Lilly. Councillor Warnes.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, on the 106 money to fund community facilities, Where that site is based, the closest community facility will be the Hyde Community Centre, which would actually be accessible by foot. So I'm a bit surprised that that's not in line for some of the Section 106 money, because they do run quite a lot of activities there, and it is a facility that is open to everybody, which was the point Councillor Davison was making. I wanted to test this idea about why the cycleway footpath has to be shared, because I see little point in us condemning ourselves to making the same mistakes of just putting in shared footways, which are unpopular and do have safety concerns. And I'm not convinced by the distinction that has been drawn that we can only ask for a shared cycleway because it's not part of the town centre. Whereas when you look at the Colchester urban area, if you was to actually restrict segregated cycleways just to the town centre, there'd be an awful lot of Colchester urban area that you would be condemning to having shared cycleways, of which many of us around this table says it just doesn't work. And I think that is correct. I don't think that's a false observation, by numerous councillors. They just don't work. So I would really like to push and understand why we can't ask for a contribution to have a segregated cycle and footway on that piece of land, because I don't accept the premise that you have to be in the town centre in order to have a segregated cycleway and footway.
Thank you, Councillor Warnes. I must say I agree with you on that point. To me, I know it is an improvement if you widen the footpath, but given that we have a new estate being built, it to me seems to go backwards if we do not factor in space for the future when we have the opportunities to do so. So I'm puzzled about that myself. Whether or not we can get some clarification on that this evening from the Highways Officer, perhaps Ms. Calder can let us know. But Ms. Calder, do you have any comments on, again, Councillor Davidson's comments and the various comments that have been put to you?
Yes, I'll start with the easy ones. So the car club, I think, has been explained how it might work. The one EV charging point is for the car club car only. So the car club car will have a dedicated parking space and a dedicated charger. Building regulations have had new legislation introduced, or will have new legislation introduced in 2022, so this year. As part of that, it will be a requirement for every new dwelling to be provided with an EV charging point. So we have at the moment an informative on this decision, on this recommendation, to say that every unit, which is every dwelling, where there's allocated parking, should have a charging point. And where there's unallocated parking, it should be one charger per 10 units, I think. It's in the informative. So we can only deal with that as part of an informative because it is under the legislation of building control. But obviously we are trying to change our habits. So there will be a requirement for every new house. And by the time this reserved matters will come in, that legislation is in force, I would assume. So they will have to provide electric charging points. The Methodist Church, I can't guarantee this, but I would assume it's public and it's managed by the council, because otherwise we wouldn't have asked for money to improve the facilities. If you are against giving them all of the requested monies, then we might, in discussion with our colleagues from communities, might be able to redistribute some of the money. So we ask for the contribution, but we can split the contribution from this community facility and we can give it to another facility. If this is something you minded to explore, I would probably ask you to give delegated powers back to us as officers to redistribute that money in line with what you think might be more appropriate. So it doesn't have to come back to committee for that very reason. The shared cycleways, I'm going to answer that one more question, and then I'm going to ask whether Martin Mason can help me on this one. So the shared cycleway, a separate cycleway and footpath needs at least 4.5 meters in width. We've asked for 3 to 3.5. So, and this is not a request of the footpath is, so the Highway Authority have asked for 3.5 meters, and our Sustainability and Transport officers asked for 3 meters. So we probably will go for the 3.5. But the separate one would need an additional meter, which would eat into the site even more and reduce the opportunity for housing to be provided on this site. So it could be that it's not possible to provide 130 houses because we've already asked them to give some of their land to us to widen that footpath. So it will eat further into the land and it is much more costly. I didn't ask what the difference is, but they did say it costs a lot more money. And the reason why I say it's unjustified is because our Sustainability and Transport officer has not requested this. She thinks the shared cycleway and footpath is good enough, a good enough improvement for this site. If members, you now have a choice to make. If you want to ask for that contribution, the risk is that the applicant will say no, in which case we might then have to refuse the application and it would have to go to appeal potentially on that only reason. With there not being any support from our Sustainability and Transport officer who has assessed the site, who has asked for the contribution, who has in mind what she wants to do to improve that area, I can't give you, I don't know how I would word how I would justify that at an appeal. So just bear that in mind. You are entitled to ask for it. I don't know what the repercussions are going to be. And for the 20 miles per hour, if I could ask for some help from Martin Mason, if he's around.
Good evening. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Hi there. Good evening, members. Thank you, Chair. I think there might be some confusion over what's proposed in terms of the footpath along the southern boundary of the site. It is just that, it's a footpath. It's not a footpath, cycle path. And indeed, the remainder of the Prowl network to the east of the site is, in inverted commas, just footpaths at the moment. I think the idea behind widening the footpath, and I'll talk about the width in a second, is the hope is that by widening it, as future development comes forward to the east of this site, further opportunities to widen the rest of the Prowl network will come forward. Because obviously what we're keen to do is develop not just a footpath network, but also a cycle path network in this part of the town. But legally, their legal status at the moment is just you know, as I say, in inverted commas, footpaths. But that's the reason why we're asking for it to be widened, because we're hoping it'll become part of a comprehensive network of footpath, cycle paths as more development comes to the east of this site. I've visited the site myself, as I always do with large sites, and I noted that actually this stretch of the footpath is already surfaced, and some of it is already at 3.5 meters wide. However, it's not a consistent width along there at 3.5, hence why we're asking for it to be a consistent 3.5 meters wide. I think in terms of whether it should be segregated or shared, we're obviously moving away from having the white line down the middle in terms of segregation, and sticking with shared facilities in circumstances such as this. Obviously, LTN 120 talks about segregation, but that's not possible here. So we have to achieve the best we possibly can within the space that's available to us. And I think what Mrs. Calder has said about the likely demand for walking and cycling in this location, a 3.5 meter, a consistent 3.5 meter wide facility should be ample in terms of satisfying the demand for walking and cycling. In terms of the site itself, Mrs. Call has made it clear that obviously it's an all matters reserved except for access application. And so matters to do with on site would come forward as part of a reserved matters planning application. That will be our opportunity to negotiate a layout that's in accordance with the Essex Design Guide. And it's very likely that it would be developed by a national house builder. I can't think of an estate that's not 20 that's been brought forward by the likes of Persimmon and Bellway, etc., Mersey Homes. They like 20-mile-an-hour zones. We like 20-mile-an-hour zones. And that's very likely that's what will come forward. And in saying that, we accept cycling on carriageway under a 20-mile-an-hour zone. So that's what we'd expect on this site. And then as long as we're busy developing the links around the site, which we are as part of development, then you've got that connection from the carriageways on the site to the off-site facilities. And then just one last point while I'm here, there's been discussion around traffic congestion, as there always is. I think it's important to remember that Mrs. Calder has mentioned that the site has a lawful planning use and would be generating traffic, quite a lot of traffic, if it was fully occupied, including heavy goods vehicles. And the infrastructure around this site is not great in terms of HGVs. So in a way, by it becoming just purely housing as allocated in the emerging plan, there is potentially quite a lot of benefit in terms of not having HGVs trying to access this site. And by virtue of its location, it's hoped that the number of cars will be kept to a minimum in terms of generation. It's in quite an accessible location on a good bus route, not far from the town centre. So it should hopefully keep generation down as well in terms of car traffic. Hopefully that's helpful. I'm here all evening, so please come to me if you need any more help.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mason. Councillor Moore.
Thank you. It's going back to the church, the issue of the Methodist church. Now, Nadine suggested that it must be publicly owned, otherwise I would very much like that to be checked, because we are talking about allocating £250,000. I can see that, well, to my mind, I think that £250,000 might better be split with the community centre down at the Hythe, particularly so if the church is in fact not publicly owned. I think there's potentially a real problem there. Yeah, I would like to see half of it go to the Methodist church, if providing that does fulfill the need of being a publicly owned building, and the other half to go, because it sounds to me as the Methodist church it's more saying creches and things like that for youngsters, rather than the sort of things that a community hall can do. I don't know, because I don't know enough about it, but I am concerned that £250,000 is going to what might be privately owned. So I don't know if we can build that into our permission, please, that it's looked at again. I wouldn't want to deny the Methodist Church of needed funds, but at the same time, it needs to be looked at more carefully and perhaps split with the community hall. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Moore. We're nearly coming, I think, to decide if anyone has a proposal on the table. Sorry. Oh, sorry, Councillor Oxford, I couldn't see you there. Thank you.
I was just coming in on that final point. I understand what Councillor Moore's on about, but if I was ward councillor, I'd be a little bit upset if my Section 106 money was going into a different ward. And the Hythe community centre, from what I understand, is not in Newtown. Am I right? Yeah. So that would somewhat pee me off if it was happening in my ward.
Thank you, Councillor Oxford. Councillor Warnes.
Yeah, on a point of clarification, unless I've got this wrong, Gerard, the application site is actually in the Hythe. That's where the site is, and the demarcation line is actually Port Lane, and the Methodist Church actually comes under Newtown and Christchurch, but the actual site comes under Hythe and Old Heath, and that is where the Hythe Community Centre is based.
I got it different because I thought Lorcan was here as ward councillor, and obviously you're saying now he isn't.
Lorcan is not the ward councillor of the area. Councillor Scored is Fox and Lily are.
Sorry, Councillor Lilly.
The reasons we didn't object to it is because all of our residents use it, because it's a very rare in that area to have one. We have the Old Heath Community Centre down there. They have a lot that goes on. We also have the CAF, which is getting some money as well. So I don't know much about the church because it's not in my ward, but obviously all our residents use it and we had no complaints about the going there. So I think it's down to others to have a look at it to see.
Thank you. Mr. Cairns.
Thank you, Chair. If I could just clarify the point that has been raised with regard to ownership of community assets. Many community assets are not in public ownership, and yet we give them grant. That is because they're generally in charitable ownership. And I would have thought that probably the Old Heath Methodist building is in charitable ownership. I do understand the point that's been raised about giving public funds to a private commercial enterprise. But for example, we often give monies to the Church of England premises and other community buildings throughout the town. And it isn't a requirement that they are in public ownership, just that they are in some form of charitable ownership. That could be a trust or other form of charitable ownership. And with regard to the issue of spend, it may be within ward, but the key test is whether it is the most geographically proximate location for the project to be delivered in relation to the application site. It doesn't strictly have to be in ward. It has to be geographically proximate to the site. And I think that's the point that's been raised by Councillor Lilly. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cairns. Does anyone have a proposal for this application? And there's so many issues. There's the reserved matters, CCTV, there's whether or not we are happy with the cycle path. I think Mr. Mason actually made it clearer, and I think from my point of view, easier to accept it. But do we have a proposal on the table? Councillor Oxford.
Chair, I think notes have been taken of comments been raised. I'm sure conversations will be had with the developer, and perhaps these can be discussed further at reserved matter stage. I think we should just accept what's before us tonight and let them move forward and take it further.
So if I will make a proposal that we accept the recommendation for this application together with the legal agreement, the Section 106 legal agreements, the conditions, and the CCTV and all those other things that we've discussed which come under reserved matters. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Oxford. Thank you, Councillor Oxford. May we go, are you ready to go to the vote? And if so, all those in favour?
Eight, 4.
And against?
1 against, Chair. So the motion
Thank
is
you very
carried.
much. So that is carried. Thank you very much, committee. We will now have that short break of 15 minutes and we will therefore resume here at 7:30. Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to this session of the Planning Committee. The next item on our agenda is 7.2, which is the land west of 194 and east of 202 Old London Road. This has been is recommended for approval, subject to conditions and Section 106 legal agreement. We have our presenting officer, Simon Cairns, and public against Gerard Wells and for James Firth. And we have the visiting councillors, Councillor Lewis Barber via Zoom, Councillor Kevin Bentley to be read by Robert Carmichael, and Councillor Andrew Ellis to be read by Robert Carmichael. So to start us off, may I ask Simon Cairns to present this to the committee, please?
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, members and members of the public. I will just share my screen. So we have before us this evening an application, a full application for development of land to the west of number 194 Old London Road and to the east of number 202 Old London Road, Marks Tay. This is a major commercial development. Oh. Click on the click on the click on there on Wednesday's window and then click on that and then share. Thank you. Apologies, Chair. I'll start that one again. So we have an application before us for a full application for the development of land as I described at Old London Road, Marks Tay. It is for commercial, a mixture of commercial uses comprising business and service uses within class E, C and G, which is the old B1 type uses, general industrial, class B2, and storage and distribution uses within class B8. The application includes the associated access, parking provision, both for the development itself and to compensate for loss on street residence parking, together with landscaping and the diversion of a public right of way, which currently leads from the A1, which is intended to lead from the A120 to Dobbies Lane, together with off-site highway improvements to the Old London Road at its junction with the A120. So this is the site, Chair. As you can see, it's sandwiched between Old London Road on the north side of the A12 and the railway line to the north of the site. It abuts the Anderson site to the west, with residential properties lining the frontage of Old London Road, comprising a mixture of single-storey and two-storey dwellings. Immediately to the western boundary of the road frontage, you'll see a residential development known as the Crescent. And here is a view looking eastwards along Old London Road, and you can see the red arrow more or less shows where the proposed access would be created through the hedgerow that currently fronts Old London Road. And again, here we have a view of properties to the south and east of the development on its frontage with Old London Road, typical two-storey 20th century houses at this point. And again, we have a view along Old London Road, showing the presence of on-street parking and generally the quite narrow and otherwise rural character of this road, which does form part of the trunked road network under the jurisdiction of national highways as opposed to the county council as highway authority. So again, there are residence permit restrictions with limited off-street parking. As you can see, the dwellings in front of the parking spaces in front of the dwellings on your screen, which are in relatively close proximity to the application site access. And here we have an aerial shot, which in this area of the screen, you can see the existing Anderson site. This is the application site here with a small belt of trees and shrubs bisecting the site. You can see there are a few trees otherwise on the site, but boundary hedgerows. And then in the same view, you can see the frontage development along my cursor, fronting Old London Road. And again, Chair, here is the application site from the opposite view from the northwest, showing the site bisected by this shrubby planting with the Anderson site in this area, and then residential development to the north side of the railway line in the village of Marks Tay. And again, a further aerial shot showing the site in context on the east side of the Anderson site here, and with frontage development to Old London Road, which you can see is very intimately related to the line of the A12. And here is the village hall and recreation ground, which abuts the boundary of the application site. So the proposals make provision for improvements to the road junction of Old London Road and the A120. Details have been conditioned by Highways England, and that forms part of the suggested conditions within the report. And again, here is the proposed access improvement showing the swept path of HGV vehicles, demonstrating that they will be able to use that junction with ease. And again, we've got the proposed access into the site, this time from Old London Road, showing the swept path of HGV vehicles. They would enter the site adjacent to the southernmost unit. This is an office unit referred to as 1110, which I'll show you some further details of in a moment. And again, this is a further swept path analysis within the tracking of HGVs within the application site to show that the maneuverability, in this case, in front of a B1 unit, a B8 unit, immediately to the north of dwellings in Old London Road. And again, HGV maneuvering showing the ability to turn HGVs within the application site area. So from this layout, you can see the proposed vehicular access arrangements, which form a main spine access on the western side of the application site. You'll see the site is shown to be developed with, in essence, 4 blocks. The southernmost block is an office unit. The block known as 1000, where my cursor is now, is a proposed B8 warehouse unit. And then the blocks to the north of the site are a combination of B2 and B8. So as you can see, these are the residential properties that front Old London Road to either side of the proposed vehicular access. And these are the proposed 7 parking spaces which would substitute for the removal of on-street parking on Old London Road itself. And again, an expanded image showing the proposed loading bays to the front of unit 1000, that unit here, which is a large unit. I've got some elevational details to show you in a moment. And here are the loading bays which would access that unit together with the on-street parking that serves the unit. In total, there are 115 spaces proposed on site, 8 HGV spaces, 50 cycle spaces, and 7 replacement spaces for residents who would lose the on-street parking that presently exists. The developers propose to allocate 12% of these spaces to have electric vehicle charging points to serve them. And here is the whole site as was previously proposed in a withdrawn application, which showed a much closer relationship between unit 1000 and these units here with the adjacent residential development. This was considered to be wholly unacceptable in terms of the amenity of these properties in particular, this is the scheme as now submitted, which, as you can see, pulls this unit considerably further from the northern boundary of the dwellings fronting Old London Road. This unit here is a much lower unit. I have some elevational sectional details to show you of that unit in a moment. These units are subdivided, as you can see. So in effect, we have a variety of employment and business uses on the site, which would generate some 360 vehicular movements a day, of which 96 of those movements would be HGV related. Some 300 or so jobs would be created as part of the proposals. So this is a plan and elevation showing the most northern of those units. As you can see, it's a fairly typical employment type building of no particular architectural significance or merit, but it is a fairly generic employment unit. And here's some details of the way in which the floor space is subdivided to provide for office floor space in a mezzanine format. And again, this is the building to the south of the most northern block. Again, a fairly generic employment use, perfectly functional, and with sheet cladding and a fairly low pitched sheet clad roof, and a similar internal arrangement with a combination of office floor space and business floor area on the ground floor. And this is the large warehouse building, the B8 use, which is immediately to the north of the residential frontage to Old London Road. As you can see, it is quite an imposing building. It's a large-scale building. I've got some details of its dimensions in a slide to follow, but it is set quite a considerable distance from those dwellings fronting London Road, and in particular the northern boundary of those dwellings. And again, showing ancillary office use on 2 floors of the building. This is the smallest unit, which would adjoin a bungalow on the site frontage. This would occupy the corner of the site adjoining the proposed vehicular access. As you can see, it's a fairly generic type of employment building. This is proposed to be a B1 light industrial office type use, compatible with a residential area by its very nature. And this is a very helpful section at the bottom of the screen. As you can see, we've got, this is the block known as 1000. At this position of the site, here are the dwellings here. And it is set some considerable distance from the rear of the nearest dwellings, with intervening planting shown. And these are the key dimensions of that building, block 1000. It would have a ridge height of 9.8 meters. The block is 91 meters in length. The minimum distance of the block from the rear curtilage boundary of the dwellings to the south is some 50 meters. And the distance from the block to the rear of the actual built form of those dwellings is 70 meters, which is quite a considerable distance and separation from the nearest dwelling houses, Chair. And this is a section showing the relationship with number 194 Old London Road. This is the bungalow immediately to the east of the application, the development site access as proposed. As you can see, it has been deliberately set at a relatively modest scale to improve its relationship with number 194 Old London Road, particularly in comparison with the previous scheme, which was subsequently withdrawn, which was significantly greater in scale and closer and bore a much more intimate relationship with these dwellings immediately to the northeast of the proposed site access. In addition, there is some planting shown here, but I would point out it is indicative as shown on the plan and not existing. This is the proposed appearance of the main warehousing block known as block 1000, which I gave you the dimensions previously, and its relationship to the nearest dwellings. As you can see, it's got large bays for delivery on its southern side and office type windows on its western end. You can see it has parking on the forecourt and is a significantly scaled building as described previously. The site boundaries are surrounded by a 2.4 meter high paladin type fence, this sort of wire type fence arrangement. And in addition, there is a 3.5 meter high acoustic barrier fence, which would address those boundaries which are adjoining dwelling houses. And that is to manage any noise emitted by the business uses on site and vehicular movements in relatively close proximity to dwelling houses. And this plan illustrates the proposed landscaping scheme, which is extremely limited in its extent. Members will note from the report, this has been found to be unacceptable and conditioned out, with an alternative scheme required to be submitted in compliance and agreed in compliance with conditions. As you'll see, there are relatively limited areas for landscape planting within this plan and limited buffer areas adjoining the residential boundaries here and here. This is considered inadequate and an objection is shown from our landscape officer. Part of the scheme is to provide a footway, cycleway link from the development to the A120. This is across land in the ownership of the parish council. It's an extremely important strategic link for the development to promote sustainable travel. Markstay is a highly sustainable settlement insofar as it has a mainline railway station and indeed a bus station. which are within walking distance of the application site area. You will note from the recommendation that a contribution has been sought to the provision of this link. However, it is, we have had correspondence from the parish council, and they believe it is too onerous upon them to deliver it. And accordingly, there has been an amended recommendation made on this application, namely to require the developer to deliver a segregated cycleway footway link to the A120 as part of a Section 106 obligation in accordance with a scheme to be submitted and agreed by the local planning authority. It is also considered that that link should preferably be lit in an appropriate manner to encourage use, particularly during the dark winter and winter nights and mornings, to encourage active and sustainable modes of travel. I will now very quickly, Chair, go through the amendments list, amendment sheet, which includes a further letter of representation from the Right Honourable Priti Patel MP. Hopefully you've had a chance to read that. In essence, the content of that representation relates to concerns over highway matters, and in particular, the use of Old London Road by an increased number of HGVs. The MP would like to see further dialogue with National Highways around the proposed A12 road improvements, which are yet to be part of a development consent order application in the forthcoming year. In addition, we have a further email from the applicants confirming they have increased the number of on-site cycle parking spaces to 50 and increased the level of electric vehicle charging points to 12% of spaces. And in addition, they have offered to increase the financial contribution for the delivery of the footpath from 45,000 as previously agreed by a further 10% to £49,500. However, as explained, that is not considered acceptable having regard to the limitations on a parish council to deliver such a significant piece of infrastructure. And instead it is suggested that the recommendation is amended to require the developer to deliver that link on behalf of the parish council. In addition, a request was received on behalf of one of the proposed tenants of one of the units, seeking a relaxation in the restrictions on the operating hours of the unit. That was consulted upon with our colleagues in environmental protection, and they did not find that to be acceptable, having regard to the need to protect the amenities of neighbouring properties. In terms of the policy position, this is a complex application for a variety of reasons. The site has long been subject to a site allocation in the current adopted local plan, where it is allocated for employment uses. It is now also allocated in the emerging local plan at policy SS11 for employment purposes. And in response, the neighbourhood plan, which is in an advanced state and has been subject to examination and is likely to proceed to referendum in March of this year. This policy MT15 also allocates the site for employment purposes. Within the amendment sheet, Chair, is a copy of the relevant site allocation policy. And as you will see, it is subject to a number of criteria. I will briefly go through those. The first is that all schemes must maintain or enhance residential amenity for neighbouring houses or for future occupiers of any new residential development. The second point is that all schemes must incorporate a new pedestrian and cycle footway connection, providing a safe and attractive route from Markstay Parish Council Hall through to Dobbys Lane. The third point is that access to and from the site is via an improved direct access onto the A12, and once the planned improvements to the A12 by Highways England have been implemented and the existing road has been detrunked, and provision of a workplace travel plan in line with Essex County Council guidance. So, in essence, Chair, the site is allocated in both the emerging and adopted plan. However, the most up-to-date and relevant policy to be considered is policy MT15 within the neighbourhood plan. I can confirm that the neighbourhood plan may be afforded significant weight by virtue of paragraph 107 of National Practice Guidance, which confirms that when a plan is basically ready for submission to a referendum, that plan can be given significant weight in decision-making insofar as the plan is material to the application. Well, clearly, policy MT15 is very material to the consideration of this application. However, as you will be aware, the whole issue of access is a matter of considerable controversy within this application, specifically insofar as we do not have an objection from either National Highways as the relevant highway authority in this case, or indeed Essex County Council as highway authority for the wider network and the detrunked or non-trunk road network. The various toings and froings with consultations with National Highways are set out within the report, Chair, but the most recent of which, as you will see, is that they raise no objections subject to the imposition of relevant conditions, and they are set out within the body of the report. We are lucky to have Mark Norman from the relevant officer, engineer from National Highways with us this evening, so I'm sure he can answer some of your technical questions in relation to the highway arrangements in due course. But I think all I would like to conclude the presentation by emphasising is you have before you a significant employment application for an employment proposal which would yield approximately 300 new jobs. It provides for 12,500 square feet of new square meters, apologies, Chair, of a new commercial floor area. You need to balance the public benefits of this significant economic growth with your concerns in relation to the access in particular, but any other material planning considerations. And I will be happy, obviously, to answer any questions from members after other speakers. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cairns. I invite Gerald Wells to come and address the committee, please. Mr. Wells, you will have 3 minutes and the bell will go after 2 minutes.
Good evening, Gerald Wells, Chairman of Markstay Parish Council. Whilst Markstay Parish Council acknowledges this area is designated for commercial use, we feel that the planning consent for this area should be withheld for the following reasons. 1, Old London Road is not suitable to accommodate the proposed traffic movements. 2, the A12 changes will provide a better solution for the residents, the parish hall and the A120. The developers are placing unacceptable risk on the parish council regarding foot cycleway. Old London Road is at present narrow in places, making it impossible for 2HG vehicles to pass, and the footpath is being used, thus creating damage and safety concerns. The developers are proposing to alleviate this by providing parking places and taking away residents' parking. Developers' plans are to provide 7 parking spaces on their land. This is not adequate compensation of a lost amenity, and who would feel this is justified when carrying heavy shopping or walking home in the rain? The PC have put forward proposals to National Highways to provide direct access to this site from the slip road of the new Junction 25. Discussions have taken place with National Highways and have been supported by our ward councillors, our county councillor and our MP. At present, we are awaiting a meeting with National Highways and our MP. It appears that the project team from National Highways looking at the A12 and the team commenting on this scheme are not communicating their findings, leaving a less than strategic approach. Further traffic concerns are the speed of vehicles using this road and the difficulties of joining the A120 from Old London Road. At this junction, there is entrances to the businesses opposite and traffic light controlled pedestrian crossing. The existing traffic volumes approaching the roundabout already queue back around 2 miles at peak times, and increasing the use of this junction will only compound this, creating even more air pollution to an area that has already been highlighted as one of the worst in the county. Furthermore, the increased traffic along Old London Road will make the parish hall much more difficult to access and therefore a lot less desirable to host functions. Part of the proposals for this development was for a walkway and cycle route to be provided by the developers from this site to the railway station across the Markstay playing field to meet the A120 close to the Old London Road junction. The developers have since changed their minds and are providing a sum of 45,000 for the PC to provide this. The PC have expressed concerns to developers and the planning officers at CBC. They do not have the expertise to project manage this scheme or ability to cost this project. As such, it appears a risk is being transferred from the developers to the PC. This is not considered fair or reasonable. In view of this, we would ask that planning consent is deferred until all investigations have been completed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wells. May I now ask Mr. James Firth to address the committee? You will have 3 minutes, Mr. Firth, with a bell going after 2. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. My name is James Firth from Savills, speaking on behalf of the applicant Marks Tay Limited. Since the previous withdrawn application, the applicant and ourselves have been working with officers, consultees and the community to bring forward this allocated site and invest in Colchester Borough. Marks Tay Limited are committed to delivering a first-class employment site and have businesses waiting to get on site. The application site, as you heard, is allocated in the existing adopted local plan, the main modifications emerging local plan and the emerging Marks Tay neighbourhood plan. As you will be aware, national planning policy states that significant weight should be given to the need to support economic growth, and as noted in the officer's report, the site is anticipated to support approximately 300 jobs. Changes have been made during the application period, including the relocation of development away from adjoining boundaries, with block 1000 now over 50 metres, as has been shown. And in light of recent discussions, we also propose to further increase cycle parking and electric charging. We recognise the concerns of the Parish Council and that they have been liaising with National Highways with regards to the wider changes to the A12. However, the National Highways future works are not within the applicant's control, and this is a site that has been allocated within the adopted local plan for considerable time, and planning legislation of course requires the application to be determined against the adopted development plan and relevant material considerations at the present time. The emerging neighbourhood plan, as you've heard, sets out a need for consideration of residential amenity, which of course also required by the adopted local plan and has been an important part of the scheme design. The scheme also includes a pedestrian cycle link through the site and also includes a proposed travel plan. Extensive engagement with National Highways has been undertaken and a direct access to the A12 was not supported. The preferred solution being that which is now proposed as part of the application. The scheme has been confirmed as acceptable by the highway authorities. We note the updated officer recommendation regarding the path, and the applicant is willing to work with your officers and the parish through section 106 to ensure the onward path can be delivered. The application site is allocated for the proposed use, meets adopted local plan requirements. It has no objections for National Highways or an Essex County Council. It is accompanied by the required road safety audits, and it will deliver significant economic benefits, including an anticipated 300 jobs. We therefore request you support your officer recommendation and resolve to grant planning permission. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Firth. Councillor Lewis Barber, are you with us on Zoom, please?
I am. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Good evening. Am I good to go?
Yes, please.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to really raise a point about where we are as local representatives on this matter. We met recently with Right Honourable Priti Patel, MP, as the local member for Parliament, as well as Councillor Bentley, Councillor Ellis, Councillor McLean, myself, and Copford and Marks-Tay Parish Council representatives. And I think there's recognition across all tiers of government that there's a slight disjointment between different parts of national highways. And we feel that we could work together now, if this application is deferred, to come to a resolution on the access point. I'll leave some of the more specifics on details of the planning application itself to my borough colleagues' representation, because I'm here as the county member for Marks-Tay. So I'm particularly interested in the aspect of the transport and the impact of the highways network. And I'll just echo the comments of what Gerald said, and we've been trying to proactively find a solution, but there has been a bit of disjointment in conversations. But I think that with the Member of Parliament on board now, which has been on board, but as in she's intervening on this, looking to make sure that we can find a solution, working proactively to come to a resolution, I would just respectfully ask for a bit more time from us to do so, and the application is deferred. Recognising its position in the local plan, I understand how difficult that can be to make a rejection, but I do think deferring has merits just while we work through some of these issues. There's a golden opportunity to resolve it by the fact that there's a massive change to the A12 coming, and ensuring that's all linked up, I think would be really beneficial. Old London Road, I don't know how many of you know of it or have been down there, but it is very narrow, and in reality, residents are not going to park in a commercial development, and that's just not going to happen, and we know it. That we can perhaps be wishful about that's quite, that as a solution, but it's just not going to happen when you can park outside your house. And there's obviously the issue to do with the village hall access, which is a busy and popular large village hall and frequently used, and there could be traffic risks as a result of that too. So I just respectfully ask you to defer the application so we can have a bit more time to work through with our colleagues from National Highways to make sure that we come to resolution on this, and we can move the application forward then in future. But for now, I would very much ask for a deferral to give us a bit more time, because we've just had the meeting actually on it where we were going to make proposals to National Highways on what to do while there was the hold on the application. But thank you very much for giving me the time to make the submission this evening.
Thank you, Councillor Barber. We will now have pieces read out from Councillor Kevin Bentley and Councillor Andrew Ellis, read out by Robert Carmichael, our Democratic Services Officer. Thank you, Robert.
Thank you, Chair. I'll read out the response from Councillor Kevin Bentley first. This statement is on behalf of Councillor Kevin Bentley, who sadly cannot be here this evening due to other responsibilities and duties he has to fulfil. But he feels strongly on this topic and would like his views heard as one of the borough councillors for Marks-Tay. While no one disputes the need to encourage businesses to grow and to expand, which is good for the economy and jobs, we must also do this with proper consideration of what that means for existing communities and ensure we properly plan ahead. Otherwise, we just keep building with no attention to the long-term effects. If we do not improve the infrastructure in a sustainable way and prepare for different modes of travel, including electric vehicles, then we shall head for disaster and a devastating effect on those who currently live in Marks Tay, as well as those who will live in new homes in the future. If we do not pay heed to this, then we will fail future generations. Specifically regarding this particular development, with no planned better junction onto the A120, then we shall face congestion and that will be detrimental to health and well-being of residents, as well as bad for the environment. It is important that we all understand that congestion is not eased by electric vehicles. A car or lorry is still a car or lorry, whichever way it is powered. Therefore, greater consideration needs to be given to access to this new proposed site, and I would urge the committee to defer this planning matter until we can work more closely with National Highways on this matter and discuss better alternatives. As councillors, we have and will continue to work closely with the Parish Council and also our MP. We are now seeking urgent meetings with National Highways to discuss, and we would welcome our planners at Colchester Borough Council to participate in those talks. We owe it to residents now and those that will live in Marks Tay in the future to get this right. Retrofitting infrastructure is not acceptable, and we have one chance to get this right. Councillor Kevin Bentley. Shall I move on to this one, Chair?
Yes, please.
Thank you, Chair. So this is a statement from Councillor Ellis. I'm sorry that I am unable to attend Planning Committee in person this evening, but I am currently engaged in a council meeting elsewhere. You will no doubt have much discussion this evening about highways matters, and it is quite right that you do so. I believe it is no exaggeration to say that this application has the potential to break the local highways network if those with the power to do so do not fully comprehend the harm that will be done if approved in its current form. Highway schemes which are currently in their planning stages need to be revised to accommodate this and other developments in close proximity. And I would expect the highways officials with you this evening to be in detailed dialogue regarding this with the applicant as well as CBC and the Parish Council. Sadly, this is not currently the case. With others covering the highways aspect, I would like members to also turn their attention to the built form, use classes and landscaping of the site. I can't agree with paragraph 2.3 of the report. This development might relate to current adjacent site, but it does nothing to enhance the area in which it would be developed. Our own landscape officer has said the scheme is not acceptable, and I would go further to say it needs a complete redesign from a landscaping point of view. It is a veritable desert in landscaping terms, and the scheme has not moved with the times as far as landscape policy is concerned. Our own ENV1 in the emerging local plan expects development to conserve and enhance biodiversity on site, and we have further expectations regarding canopy cover, including within the local plan modifications. The NPPF and government's model design code expect more tree planting and greening of development in the future. This scheme is woefully inadequate in planting, screening and landscaping terms. Indeed, the proposed 3.5 meter high acoustic barrier, while mitigating some of the noise, also detrimentally impacts the landscape character of the site and might also be considered to harm residential amenity. The poor landscaping is a consequence of built form of the site, which due to its size and scales leaves too much space to landscape and for any meaningful planting. This leads to a cramped appearance and a very harsh environment. The current Anderson site is such an environment, and I see no reason to exacerbate the problem. Our own planning policy does not wish you to do so either. The sheer quantum of development proposed will, I trust, cause committee members to take a hard look at whether this is, as I believe, overdevelopment. Committee might also wish to consider the uses to which these buildings are being put and consider whether some of the highways issues might be addressed by a different balance of uses. A greater amount of B1 would lessen the HGV issue, but might itself lead to too many traffic movements, so I leave that to the experts. But I firmly believe the uses should be looked into and conditioned. I also take issue with the report stating that the Marks Tay neighbourhood plan can be afforded some weight. My understanding as portfolio holder is that a neighbourhood plan which has undergone examination and is now just awaiting a date for referendum carries significant weight. I believe it should be treated as a made plan until such time as that the referendum confirms it. is made or otherwise. As such, policy MT15 of the Marks Tay neighbourhood plan should be at the forefront of members' minds when determining this application. Committee, I ask you either refuse this application of the grounds of overdevelopment, layout and density of building, and poor/insufficient landscaping, and indeed non-compliance with MT15. Alternatively, if members feel unable to refuse, would they please consider deferring the decision for officers to renegotiate the scheme with the applicant? Councillor Andrew Ellis.
Thank you very much. Before I open this up to the committee, Mr. Cairns, would you have any comments you would like to make on what we've heard so far?
Thank you. Yes, Chair. We've heard an awful lot of points around impacts on the highway network and capacity. And I think that's a matter I'll obviously have to defer to National Highways to answer those concerns. From a planning perspective, you have before you a scheme which you must consider on its merits and not an alternative scheme that is not before you. You have a scheme that makes specific arrangements for access, and we have consulted upon, and at the present time, we do not have any objections from the relevant statutory consultees in that regard. With regard to the other matters raised around landscaping, I did explain, I think, that the landscape officer indeed has found it unacceptable, and we have conditioned the submission of alternative details. You may wish to consider, of course, in light of what Councillor Ellis has had to say, whether the quantum of development on site is such that that prejudices the ability to accommodate more landscaping on site. In terms of the other matters around the acoustic barrier, that was a requirement of environmental protection. However, its impact could be mitigated through further barrier buffer planting to green and soften the impact on the residential amenities of those properties. 3.5 metres is a substantial height, admittedly. Councillor Ellis raises the issue, which is quite a subtle one, of the mix of uses on site. I think the point he is making is that the B8 use, the warehousing use, by its very nature, results in a significant number of HGV movements. Were the B8 element to be reduced, that would require negotiation with the applicants, but that could have the potential to reduce the number of HGV trips. I would have to take advice on that, but that does seem to be logical. I think that probably covers it, apart from reiterating the point that we do not have an objection from National Highways in front of us. We do have a conditional no objection subject to improvements of the junction of Old London Road with the A120. I think that's something that Councillor Bentley identified the need for. I did show you that in the presentation, and the tracking at junction, which does show it is functional. With regard to the on-street parking on Old London Road, that would require a TRO to remove it, which could be subject to objections. I posed the question to Mark Norman of National Highways. If that were successful and the parking were not removed, would the scheme still be safe? And his answer to that question was yes, it would. And I'm sure Mr. Norman will be able to elaborate on these issues of network capacity and junction safety, and indeed the interplay with the improvements to the A12. At the present time, there is no development consent order in place. That scheme has yet to be submitted and considered by the Planning Inspectorate, and we are prejudging that that scheme ever indeed goes ahead. I would suggest that we do have a duty to determine the application before us and the proposed access arrangements. But I'm sure you'll have questions, Chair, for the highways experts who are online this evening, and I'm sure we'll be happy to take questions in this regard. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cairns. I went on a site visit earlier today, and although I know the area, it's been some time since I've been in that place. I was absolutely shocked at the proximity to the A12 entrance and exit where Anderson's is. It's akin to me coming out of my front drive straight onto the A12. It was quite frightening. The traffic was very fast and consistent. I went around the Anderson site and then looked as best I could at the site for this application. I drove back up towards the Marks Tay junction, and again, in my opinion, it is wholly inadequate for the vehicle movements that will be expected of it. And although highways say that the junction to the A120 is functional, well, what on earth does that mean? Of course it's functional because it was built to take traffic, but to actually load it with the amount of traffic that will be expected, to me, is anathema. I'm absolutely shocked, that either Highways England or the group that are looking at the A120 believe this to be a worthwhile solution. And I'm also shocked that they're not talking to one another. And I think it's a gross detriment to the local people there who are expected to have their lives, in many cases, ruined to satisfy jobs. And of course we need the jobs, but surely we must have a better way of providing them than this one at this moment. But that's all I have to say at the moment. Councillor Mannion.
Thank you, Chair. I'm aghast at this, I have to say. I did some research this afternoon, and the developer's plan shows on the drawings a design criteria based on FTA 1998, which is the design and specification for articulated vehicles. And on that plan, it clearly states the length, the maximum track width, the curb-to-curb turning sizes. However, when you look at the legal limits for today's UK articulated vehicles, the 40-ton, 12-wheeler, etc., you will find that they differ. The current limits are larger, are longer, are wider than the ones on the drawing. Mr. Khan states quite categorically, and rightly so, that planners have used swept path analysis to justify the size and the movement of HGV down the London road. I would say that this is only a paper exercise using mathematical modelling, if you can call it that, unquote. However, nobody has planted two HGVs turning or coming out of London Road into the A120, or trying to access into the entrance and exit of this site. And I suggest, quite honestly, that the measurements and the diameters and the sizes and the modelling is out of kilter, and it just will not work. And at the current size, without widening the London Road significantly, you're not going to get two HGVs passing down there, let alone the issues surrounding the whole thing about parking, residence parking provision. And as fellow councillors have said, how about people in the rain taking shopping to their houses? And would they really park at the site car park? I don't think so. So I think this whole thing needs to be looked at again, deferred, withheld, and have more time to actually look at the traffic provisions and how this road can ever support multiple HGV traffic. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Mannion. Do we have any further comments? Councillor Davidson, do you wish to comment?
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Chairman. likewise, I just find this totally unfeasible, impractical. I know Old London Road quite well. I drive wide vehicles down that road regularly for access, and we quite often cannot get past a small car parked on the side. We have to get them to move it. So even removing that parking ability beside the houses, it's still, as Councillor Mannion has said, not wide enough for 2 HGVs. But what I was more concerned about is that the the agent is quoting 300 jobs, brilliant, but actually 360 movements, HGV movements a day. Now, we're proposing it being open for 14 hours a day, from 7 in the morning till 9 at night, 6 days a week. That's Saturday as well. And that actually works out at 26 HGV movements an hour, which is 1 every 2.5 minutes. And that's, can you just imagine that? So I think, again, we need to renegotiate the B8 use, which Mr. Cairns is suggesting would reduce the number of HGV traffic. But also the TRO, which I know it's a national highways road at the moment, but the TRO to actually put parking restrictions on that road. I thought that was a county council provision. The other thing that has been mentioned more than once is the unacceptable landscaping that is being proposed. This is clearly overdevelopment of this site. At the moment, this site has a small stream and a thick hedge going right through the middle of it. All that will be destroyed, and it will be replaced by characterless and modern storage buildings. And I just think that is totally overdevelopment. We need at least 10% of open space and more screening. And I would ask that to be reconsidered and insisted on. The other thing that concerns me is the footpath access across the parish council's playing fields. At the moment, the indicative line, and I know it is only indicative, goes across the pitches. Well, surely, for goodness, why should the village not be able to play their games just because the developer wants to have a footpath going right across the pitch? There must be another way. And also in the report it says, and also in policy MT15 from the neighbourhood plan for Marks Day, which Mr. Ken says we've got to give significant weight to, it says here that there will be a pedestrian and cycleway connection providing a safe and attractive route from the parish hall through to Doby's Lane. But the indicative route that we saw from Mr. Cairns's slides only goes to the site. It does not go to Doby's Lane at all. So which one do we give preference to? Well, surely, as Mr. Cairns says, significant weight should be given to MT15. So that needs to, and I totally agree that the developer needs to deliver that himself at his cost. It's not fair to put the onus on the parish council or any other body. The other thing that really concerns as well is that is the size of the building near the entrance. I see that they've reduced the eaves height on the side of the house, beside the house, but it's an absolutely stark, bleak building with no character, and it overshadows that house. Those houses are also going to lose their parking ability out the front of the house. That's going to devalue it. I know devaluing isn't a material planning consideration, but it's total inconvenience. And again, MT15 says all schemes must maintain or enhance the residential amenity for neighbouring houses or for future occupiers of any new residential development. So again, this site impacts on those residential houses. And for that reason as well, we should defer it for more a reasonable renegotiation of something that is acceptable. Thank you, Chairman. I'll leave it there for now.
Thank you, Councillor Davidson. Councillor Moore.
Thank you, Chair. I think Councillor Davidson has picked up on the issue that I wanted to raise about the neighbourhood plan, saying that although they wanted employment land, that it should not inconvenience or discommode or otherwise disadvantage residents. And if you imagine being in your house and, I mean, let's for a moment forget the noise which is supposed to be ameliorated by this huge fence. Forget that for a moment. If you're sitting in your house and there's 26 HGV movements going in front of your house every hour. Now, I think that's probably the definition of being inconvenienced and discommoded. So I rest my case on that. I couldn't possibly support this application in its present form. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Moore. Councillor Oxford.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a whole list of things that I don't like about this scheme. First of all, there's trees that were on the existing site that will go. There was an existing hedge line. God knows how many hundreds of years or whatever that was there, and that's going to go. Environmental damage, that comes under the category of. Traffic, the road is too narrow. I drove up there this morning, and I drive a Renault Traffic van, as you know, and it is extremely tight. Yes, there were some vehicles parked there. They're legitimately parked there. And as has been mentioned, the policy state about enhancing the facilities for residents. How does removing their parking spaces enhance their facilities? It certainly doesn't, not in my book. I think this is drastic overdevelopment of the site. There's so much crammed into it that it just doesn't make any sense whatever. And the landscaping, again, has already been noted, is almost non-existent. There's barely a patch of grass for a dog to go and have a wee, never mind anything of substance. So I cannot possibly support an approval for this scheme. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Oxford. Councillor Lilly.
Thank you. How can I follow that? Yes. I think Councillor Davidson sums it all up in a very good speech there, and I agree with everything he said in that. And there's lots of concerns about it. The only thing going for it, as he stated, was is employment. But there's a lot more not going for it than actually has anything in this. It's got everything that we hate: overdevelopment, noise, and the worst thing about it is taking away the parking spots that residents actually put in for to ask for a traffic regulation order to take place. And I know how long they take to take in. They have to advertise it, they have to apply for it, and they did that because it's helpful for them. And there no way are they going to be parking in that state and walking back. They'll be parking all over the shop. It's not really good enough in that. I think I agree with the chair of the parish council that we should wait to the neighbourhood plan. They've taken years to do it. It costs a lot of money for parish councils. They've taken the effort to do that. So we should take note of what it says. And it must carry great weight to any application that goes in around that area. I agree with the councillors. Councillor Barber was right that this does really needs a deferral because we need to sort out all the highways issues. And it's crazy that we will pass this without doing that because it's a serious consequence up there. In actual fact, after reading and looking at it, I agree with Councillor Ellis in his letter. It actually merits refusal really, because there's nothing in this application that is any good. To be honest, buildings too high, destroying of the hedgerows, everything, traffic problems. So, yeah, I can't support this application. I am leaning towards it should be refused, but I'm happy to go with the deferral of that, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Lilly. I don't know how many of us would actually want a refusal, or whether anyone has a proposal to defer or to and actually approve the application. Mr. Cairns.
Thank you, Chair. Can I possibly ask that Mark Norman maybe gives you some expert guidance with regard to the highway implications of the scheme? I'd just like to correct one significant error that's been made. There are not 360 HGV movements a day. There are 360 vehicle movements a day, of which 96 would be HGVs. So that is a considerable overestimate. I can run through some more of the other points, but I do think that the key point that we really do need to provide some expertise upon is the highway network and highway safety. So if I can ask you, Chair, before you decide to move to a resolution, if you can possibly take advantage of the expertise that is with us this evening, I think it would be highly beneficial to formulation of your considered opinion on the application. Thank you.
Happy to do that, Mr. Cairns. So may we have Mark Norman to address us, please?
Good evening. Hope you can all hear me.
Yes, we can.
The first thing I'd mention is the point that Simon's just picked up on, that the actual traffic movements, the 360 vehicles mentioned is all vehicles, including the HGVs. The HGVs is actually only 91 per day. So it does significantly reduce the impact. And I accept the points you're making about the car parking at the site being unattractive. I don't know what, I can understand, if it's rain, pouring rain, whatever, people being reluctant to use that. My understanding of the parking situation along there at the moment is that there is the current number of parking bays aren't regularly full, so the chances are that there will be spaces available when people want to use it, and the sort of the seminar is sort of an overspill, if you see what I mean.
Sorry, Mark, do you think you could give some information to the committee around your conclusions that the seat scheme would be safe in terms of the geometry at the access points as provided for the improvements within your conditions, and in particular the potential impact on the network capacity and whether the network can absorb that capacity safely as currently proposed?
I think it comes down to the actual numbers that are being proposed. They're talking about a maximum of 21 vehicles in the AM peak at the junction turning, and again a similar number in the evening, and I accept that junction is not without its problems. We have had some modelling work done, and there's been extensive negotiations with the developer, and they've looked at a number of options, including a right turn lane and a traffic signal junction, which doesn't work. So anything over and above what they've proposed is extremely difficult to come up with. And the impact that they're actually having on the junction is actually very small in the scheme of things. And if you were to try and defend a refusal. I think it would be unsustainable. And that's my view.
Mark, sorry, if you
helps.
could possibly expand upon that point, why would it be unsustainable to defend a refusal? Can you possibly explain that to members, please?
Just because of the sheer impact due to the very low numbers of turning vehicles.
Well, thank you, Mr. Norman. I think we've heard enough, unless you have more comments to make.
Chairman, could I just ask Mr. Norman about traffic regulation orders? Because obviously a lot of people park at Old London Road to go to the train station, and there's generally a continuous line of cars parked on one side of that road all during the working day. So how is he going to alleviate that problem?
Can you answer that for us?
Yeah, happily. My understanding is there's already a weighting restriction along Old London Road, and the enforcement, I believe, is by the town centre car parking partnership. I don't know how often they visit, or I suspect they blitzed it when it first went in, and it's waned a little bit since.
Thank you, Mr. Norman. Committee, therefore, I think it perhaps would not be a sensible thing to actually refuse this outright at this time. Councillor Moore.
We could indeed leave out anything to do with highways being in our reason for refusal, but we have plenty of other reasons for refusal. I think the thing is not to, because the information that we have about highways is strange, to say the least, given the circumstances. I think probably best not to quote it in our reason for refusal, because even though at appeal our refusal might be upheld, if we used highways and that wasn't supported, we would probably get clobbered for costs. So I would suggest that we take our other, if we are mindful to refuse, that we take all the other reasons like the overdevelopment, the lack of landscaping, detrimental effect on neighbouring properties. I think we use those for refusal and forget highways for the time being, if that's what we are mindful to do. I'm sorry, I'm worried about deferring it, because unless unless it is substantially changed, it will just come back with exactly the same problems. The planning committee will have to go through this all over again. I don't see the point.
Thank you very much. Councillor Oxford.
I'm sorry, Chair, but I was staggered by that response from highways. I mean, I've got Colchester Business Park in my ward, and it's got very good road links. I think we might struggle to get 360 vehicles, lorries that is, in and out of there in a day. And whether it's a 40-tonner, a 20-tonner, a 10-tonner, 3,500 weight or whatever, it's 360 vehicle movements down a very, very narrow section of road. It is extremely narrow. My vehicle was constitute a 3,500 weight van for Renault Traffic, and it struggled to get through because there were parked vehicles there. So I think highways would need to remain there because the sheer volume of traffic that we're talking about, traffic movements going down that road to this site as proposed, would have a problem. And I was going to be really cheeky and cover up my eyes and say that's the only way that any highways person can consider this okay, but I didn't. But I mean, it is bizarre to me that that is the answer we got. We've got hedges gone, trees gone, huge amount of traffic. We've got not enhanced residential facilities, but reduced residential facilities. Overdevelopment of the site, it's absolutely crammed with units, and the landscaping's non-existent. Take your pick, or all of them for that matter, in my view. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Oxford. Councillor Mannion.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to make a proposal, Chair. I would like to propose that this application is deferred, not because I believe that it will be successful, because I'm worried that if we refuse it, we will have the whole thing coming back in our face with fines and court cases and everything else on appeal. Whereas I think if it is deferred, there is a likelihood that negotiations between Highways and the Parish Council and Colchester will actually resolve some of the problems that we currently face, or at least I hope so. So my proposal is that we defer this until such time as some definitive and satisfactory results can be resolved.
I'm happy to second the deferment, but I'd also like to see that a full environmental study is taking place of the existing site with the stream and the hedge, and to make sure that in the renegotiations that actually that there is a significant amount of landscaping on the site and less B8 use. And I'm certainly very concerned about the street scene, that large characterless building between two residential properties just looks completely out of character.
Thank you, Councillor Davidson. Councillor Lilly.
Yes, thank you. What worries me about deferral is we can defer it so that talks go on with Highways about the junctions onto the 120 and the A12, but who's going to talk about the other issues on the site? The TRO removal, as you stated earlier. It's a fast road, and I must declare a non-pecuniary interest in this as I was in charge of the Parkin and Parson TROs. This road was always coming up as residents complain about speeding vehicles, people parking there to go to the train station. So it was put in place to help the residents live peacefully and able to park in their own area without the nuisance of train station people. And as we all know, you take those cars out, there's going to be a speed road death race down there. So what worries me is we defer to talk about those highways issues over the junctions, but is it going to come back with all the same application that none of us like here tonight? The overdevelopment, the damage to the environment, the noise. Are we really happy with 96 vehicles a day, HGV vehicles? Where else has a place where 96 vehicles go in and out to? The noise, the reversing noise of all going on. It's going to be horrendous. I wouldn't like to live up there with this application nearby. And as for the footpath across the football pitches, well, don't get me started on that. I mean, please, come on. If I was in charge of the football club up there, like I was in Rowage, I'd be turfing those people off straight away. And but anyway, I'm happy to go for. I want a refusal, but I would support deferral.
Would you like to propose refusal? We have one for deferral. Would you like to propose?
Well, actually, I think I will do. I'd like to propose it for refusal on a lot of the issues that we had, apart from the highways ones, which probably could be resolved. But overdevelopment of this site, the massive amount of traffic movement is noise and goes against the environment. The removal of the traffic regulation order, which goes against everything as a safety aspect. Tall buildings, we've got everything in there. I've never known an application that has so much evidence to have a refusal, to be honest. But
I'll be happy to second that, Councillor.
so there we are. I'm proposing a refusal.
I'll second that, but meantime, Councillor Warnes.
Thank you, Chair. There are many reasons why this application is unsatisfactory. One has to question why it was ever designated as employment land in the first place, given the access problems that have clearly come out. But you can see that many authorities have designated it as employment land. And so clearly someone in their wisdom thought that it was suitable. But we're struggling to see how access is reasonably possible, and many other reasons. It does strike me that too much is trying to be crammed into this area, and there isn't enough for, landscaping. But what it does flag up to me is that it would be reasonable, I believe, for us to support Councillor Mannion's proposal to actually defer this, to give the applicant the opportunity to have a radical rethink here and to actually negotiate with the various authorities and see whether something much more acceptable and reasonable can actually be brought forward, because it was designated as employment land for a reason. So I believe we need to give the applicant that opportunity and act reasonably ourselves and defer this and see what comes back.
Thank you, Councillor Warnes. Mr. Cairns, would you like to make any further comment before we go to the proposal to defer?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I think if members do have, and as they obviously do, very significant concerns around the detail of the application, notwithstanding the access, I think deferral is the right way forward to allow officers to seek redesign to address the concerns expressed by members. In addition, as you're probably, I'm sure, aware, Chair, there are proposals which are imminently to come forward for improvements to the A12. Those proposals do provide for a roundabout to the immediate south of the Anderson site, giving more direct access. And I think that is what the neighbourhood plan alludes to when it refers to development anticipated to come forward in 2028 to tie in with those A12 improvements. If members so require, I think it would be a wise move to incorporate further discussions via both the MP and this council and ward councillors around the improvements to the whole highway network in this area, and particularly the relationship to the A12, which hopefully will open this site up for valuable employment development. As you're aware, Chair, this site has been allocated for many, many years, in fact, going back to 2010 for employment purposes. There are, therefore, I think, great merits in trying to sculpt the proposal into an acceptable form rather than seeking to reject the principle, although I do obviously respect the matters that members have identified as being significant shortcomings within the scheme. But if you'd resolve to defer, those can, I'm sure, be addressed positively by the applicant. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cairns. So we have on the table, oh, sorry, Councillor.
I was just picking up on what Mr. Cairns said, and that is about involving the MP and county councillor, etc., as was mentioned in the letters originally. That makes very good sense in my view, because hopefully that way it would come back in a very much radical and improved scheme that isn't overdevelopment, has some landscaping, etc., and also reduces noise. But I don't know if that's going to be acceptable to the applicant, but that's what I would firmly support. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Carmichael, you wanted to comment?
Thank you, Chair. Just to confirm, as Mr. Cairns has read out possible items for deferment, that the proposer and seconder agreed that that is what their proposal is. It's Councillor Mannion and Councillor Davidson. And just so that we're clear on the reasons for deferral going forward.
Are you happy with those reasons for deferral, both?
Yeah, yes, thank you.
Thank you, committee. We have this proposal on the table to defer with all the resultant conditions and everything else that Mr. Cairns has highlighted. All those in favour?
Six.
All those against?
3.
Thank you. So that has passed and therefore there is no need for the proposal to refuse. Thank you very much, committee. We'll move on to the final item on our agenda. The final item on our agenda this evening is the Director's report, the amendment to the legal agreement format conditions for planning application 190665, recommended for approval of the proposed amendment to the legal agreement and conditions. Mr. Cairns, would you like to set us off?
Thank you, Chair. I'll just refresh members' minds with regard to the original site area that this application relates to. I'll briefly share my screen, hopefully more successfully this time. Oh, there we go. So before us, Chair, we have the original site application area for land to the north and south of Axial Way and bordered by the Via Herbis Romani on the western boundary and Mill Road to the south. Members may recall this was considered by committee on the 29th of July last year, when it was resolved to approve the proposal subject to a Section 106 agreement and relevant conditions. This is a fairly unique situation insofar as the council is both landowner and part developer of the site. For that reason, it cannot contract with itself, and it requires a slightly more complex process for entry into a Section 106 agreement. To that end, it is proposed to enter into a unilateral agreement under Section 106 of the Act, such that as the sites are brought forward, there is a condition in the planning permission requiring the various constituent parts and partners to enter into relevant Section 106 agreements, which would bring forward the benefits and obligations which were identified in the original report. The mechanism is set out with slightly more detail within the report, Chair, but in essence, this is a housekeeping report for transparency purposes to allow the development to be, the legal agreements to be progressed, which are slightly at variance with the detail of the original resolution. And in addition, Chair, it is requested to allow officers delegated powers to vary and insert additional conditions pursuant to giving effect to this slightly different legal approach, still under Section 106 of the Act, however, to secure the contributions and obligations as originally resolved by this committee. Happy to answer any questions, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cairns. Councillor Lilly, sorry, Councillor Oxford, beg your pardon.
Change my name. Thank you. This is in my ward, this site. The majority of it is in my ward, I should say, before a Mile End come up and say Herbis Romania is theirs. And I think, you know, it's the complication of, as Mr. Cairns has stated, about being owner and applicant complicates things. So I think I agree totally with allowing the flexibility for officers to carry out the Section 106 and amendments as they see fit to deliver what we want as a council on this site. Thank you.
Is that your proposal?
Yeah, I so move, yes.
Do we have a seconder? Councillor Davidson seconds.
Yes, I'm happy to second this. Thank you. We need to see progress on this site.
Do we have any further comments from members, or do you wish to go to the vote? To the vote. So we have the proposal to approve this proposed amendments to the legal agreement and conditions. All those in favour?
Eight.
All those against? What's the one in the middle?
Abstentions, Chair.
Abstention. I couldn't think of the word.
One.
Abstentions. One abstention. Thanks, Councillor Ward. My mind went completely blank then. Thank you very much, members. It's been quite a complicated evening, but thank you for your time and for your patience. Thank you and good night.